Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Hugh Mayers, and this is the High Caliber Man podcast. Today, I want to take you on a journey. I want to talk about a really important subject, a really important topic. It is the subject of love. But before I get into the information side and speak about some of the work of anthropologist Helen Fisher or the psychologist from Scotland or the psychologist from Canada, John Bowlby, with his attachment theory and the attachment theory work of Mary Ainsworth. I want to pose a question to you all, and I would really appreciate seeing your comments, your feedback in the comment section with respect to these two questions. And the first question is, can we have romantic relationships outside of the social settings that we exist in, right? And that means, as an example, um, there is a single parent, let's say a father, for example, who lives on the 12th floor and he is currently unemployed and has a young child, right? How does his social situation affect his relationships? Likewise, another example could be, or another aspect or factor is the person's upbringing, their value system, their class, their cultural or ethnic background, um, their political persuasion, but very, very importantly, or a very significant factor would be their socio-economic situation where they find themselves in. Can we have relationships as human beings that are not impacted by our social setting, right? That's one question, right? And the other question is I would like for you guys to reflect on. This one's a little bit more personal. So for the brave souls who want to share something in the comment section, I'm here for it. But I would understand if people might just want to reflect on this and kind of like ponder and just use it as a self-awareness tool. But how do our personal life experiences impact our romantic relationships, stroke marriage? I always want to talk about, I say relationships because I'm a Westerner, but at the same time, I don't know, people just link up, but I really have a strong belief in marriage. So I guess I like to use the term synonymously, or yeah, I think that speaks to the point I'm trying to get across, that, yeah, when I say relationships, I am talking about marriage or marriage type situations as opposed to fleeting encounters. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the work of Helen Fisher. Dr. Helen Fisher was an anthropologist, right? And she spoke about and wrote a paper some years ago called Our Primordial Drives, and its impact on our need for attachment, sex, and love. That's not the name of the paper, but should I say, that's the kind of like topics that she covers, right? How we bond, how we form relationships, and the dynamics that are at play. But she also did talk about, right, like these biological factors, neurological factors, brain activity, things that happen to us when we meet somebody. So there's a cultural space, there's a physical space, there's a kind of a cultural setting that would impact and give us a script, the meaning of interactions, whatever, how we filter the information, right? Or our experiences, should I say, how we filter our experiences, but that these experiences, he buys her flowers, she invites him over and cooks him a meal, whatever, they go to the theater, whatever it is that they do, these things and the interactions, the conversations, the laughter, the connection, right? These things have an impact on our biology. And so, for example, there's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, and that when we can be triggered in these type of encounters, in this pursuit of or in relationships, right? And it can elicit the sex hormone testosterone and estrogen, right? Then there's also the part of falling for somebody, falling in love, and then the hormone that is released is excuse me, like addictions, when we fall in love, dopamine is released, right? And there's also like cortisol that's released. And so there's this thing about butterflies in the stomach and people like feeling like physiologically as well as psychologically discombobulated, right? Because their flight or fight system has been triggered, but there's also the that bonding chemical that's released as well. And that's oxytocin. But yeah, the dopamine's produced when there's that attraction, right? When there's that spark, should I say. So she talks about sex drive, she talks about love, and she talks about attachment. So this is where I want to link in John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. So they came up with a theory related to how, from about the age of 6 months old to 2 years old, how we as human beings are really affected by the love, the nurture, those meeting our physical needs and those meeting our emotional needs, right? How those things go on to form or impact our personality type or our way of being, you could say, right? So as children, so not necessarily just parents, but we'll say like caregivers, but 99.9% of the time is going to be the biological parents, but it could be adopted parents, it could be grandparents, it could be relatives, it could be, you know what I mean, foster parents, whatever the case may be. But the caregivers that meet the child's needs or don't meet the child's needs in those early years, right, go on to form how people foster relationships, and it does show up with respect to romantic love in adult years, right? So, one of the first things that come to mind is the attachment style called secure attachment. So, secure attachment, right? It really influences how we bond with people, right? And it's basically somebody that has been had their needs met, and so they was able to regulate as a little child. They felt comfortable. They could go and explore the outside world. Um, you see that by babies that can leave their parents' side, or toddlers that can leave their parents' side, should I say, and they can kind of interact, but then they come back and check in with that parent or make eye contact with that parent. They kind of have a secure attachment. They can explore the world around them, but not stray too far, right, from that parent. And a secure attachment is related to like how we regulate emotions. People that grew up with a secure attachment, they find it easy to trust, right? They find it easy to trust because they've been looked after, right? So they've got that thing about the world being a safe place, right? They generally can grow up with effective ways of communicating. They're able to express their needs, right? They can find it easier than others, the other attachment styles, to seek love, right? To be vulnerable, right? Um, they have high self-esteem, and you say that you would refer to somebody with a secure attachment style as being um emotionally consistent. So as opposed to extreme highs and extreme lows, but in terms of a relationship, they can be, stable, for want of a better term. Then the other attachment style is avoidant, right? Avoidant attachment style is characterized by people who avoid emotional or physical intimacy, right? They have grown up where certain of their needs wasn't met and they were left hanging, um, for want of a better term, right? So they find it uncomfortable in sharing their feelings, right? They can be those people who are super independent, right? That is where they find their safety. And so to let their guard down, to come into emotional contact, to be emotionally, psychologically intimate is very difficult for them because they may feel unsafe, that they're going to be let down, right? Some of these things happen um, at a pre-conscious or unconscious level. And so, with that in mind, they can, like I said, they like to keep their barriers up. They can be dismissive with people and they really find it hard to trust. And so this is where we get the kind of, the phrase, hey, he's got commitment issues or she's got commitment issues. It could be related. It could be related to that in some respect. The other attachment style is anxious, preoccupied, right? This is a person that hasn't had their needs met in that significant way, or didn't, shouldn't say hasn't, but didn't have in those formative years, of 6 months to 2 years old, right? And so they can be quite anxious about being abandoned. They might have abandonment issues, right? So people like this can be show signs of being clingy. In the modern world, unfortunately, because of the kind of very individualistic society that we live in, being clingy is almost seen as a societal blasphemy. It's like if you're an absolute deficient human being. And I think that the era that we live in, this modern era, 2025, this part of the early part of the new millennium, many societies, and when you listen to podcasts, you read the literature, you interact with people, but there is a very strong, and I'm going to pick my word very carefully, but aloofness about many people in terms of approaching relationships, and the need for love and the desire for love. Everybody's always, single by choice. They don't just single, just, and it can speak for itself. They've always got to, qualify it, but it's by choice. And, this type of, I am without need, right? And I postulate or wonder if how much that has to do with this anxious style or even avoidant. I should say maybe that's got more to do with the avoidant, right? Because the avoidant would never want to be seen as clingy because that would be sacrilegious because I'm so self-sufficient and so independent and I'm beyond need, emotional need, need for intimacy, right? So yeah, as I said, the anxious attachment style is characterized by difficulty of being alone, of having low self-esteem, or feeling unworthy of love. Like, so and this is where the clinginess comes from. They're worried that this person is going, they're not worthy of love, and this person will leave them. They're going to leave them, and so there's this big anxiety about it. You know what I mean? And these people with this type of attachment style, they really fear rejection. They really fear rejection, and as a rejection meaning abandonment, right? And you know, yeah, it's not a crime, right? These are, we are a product of our experiences, or they do impact us. Like I asked that question earlier on, how much do our life experiences impact our relationships? So things show up, and I think that there's kind of like unrealistic expectations that we sometimes saddle ourselves with in this time that we're living in, where, all right, nobody's going to be perfect, right? But I don't know if it's Hollywood, social media, the entertainment industry, the songs that we hear, you know what I mean? The popular artists that push certain things in the culture that, not pushing an infallibility, but like unrealistic expectations, right? We have a primordial drive for love and for sex as a human species. That is why we're still here. That means that sometimes men and women find each other insufferable at times, but there's a deeper, like a genetic coding. When I say primordial, I'm talking about existing from the beginning of time. It's been in us as a species. Um, and I'm sure that it's in some way part of us still being here as a species and will be, um, for us to continue, that thing has to be, it's alive and well. Um, the fourth attachment style is disorganized, right? And some of the attributes of this style, and it's kind of like it's triggered by a fear of betrayal. That's one of the things that is to be noted by somebody that has a disorganized style. They maybe grew up in a home where there were mixed signals. Sometimes there was their needs met, and then sometimes it was not. And it was very much a case of not knowing where I stand vibe, if that makes sense. So there's a difference between not having your needs met, so you learn to be super independent, or um fear of abandonment because it was as if like you didn't get your needs met, but you wanted and you needed and you yearned for. Or there's one where this last category, this disorganized one, is where sometimes your needs were met, sometimes they were not quite met. And so, you were left, the child grows up, the infant grows up with a sense of like insecurity. It might be, things might be fine, or things can go wrong, right? And so there's a lack of trust. So there's a fear of rejection also, right? And inability to regulate emotions. Because you can imagine if you're growing up in a space where you are, as an infant, um, in those real formative years, there were some times when you were held and hugged and treated with tender care and love and affection, and you were fed and taken care of. And there was other times when it was as if, your caregiver was just ignoring you, or just, yeah, just distance you or whatever. So, they learn to even model, people who have that attachment style even manifest contradictory behavior. So when people are quick to say this person's a narcissist, sometimes they're super charming, and then sometimes they're distant, or whatever the case may be. And narcissists, but narcissists do unfortunately exist. It's a personality configuration or personality type, but there are other things that may contribute to somebody having some ways that resemble that, but that doesn't mean that they are as I said in the article I wrote some years ago, the new N word, right? Um, but yeah, these people with the disorganized style, they can have high levels of anxiety, they can be distrusting, and yeah, it's not something I think to be weaponized, but more to be dealt with or understood through a lens of empathy. Because if we are, to a large degree, a part of, impacted so significantly by our experiences, then if we meet people along the way, whether in a romantic setting, for marriage, or just even as friendships in it, right? We know that we are not perfect as individuals, and that so we expect grace or understanding from, our significant other, or from our close, confidants, right? We expect a certain, we've all got our quirks and our idiosyncrasies, right? And so we expect to understand it. So I think there is a level of empathy that needs to be extended. And when we have disagreement, are we able to hold people accountable, right? Or explore what's going on for that person and share how we felt, or, how a situation, the I statement, when you did A, B, and C or whatever, when this happened, I was left feeling this. So you're not labeling the person, but you're talking about how, you experience the circumstances. I think that will be more beneficial than we allowing our anger and our frustration to label people or weaponize shortcomings. It's just a recipe for yeah, it's a recipe for more conflict, But I think ultimately, like I said, we all live in a social set of circumstances, right? We all have cultural scripts that we've been exposed to. Hence we develop like value systems, worldview, attitudes, and these things will, or you may argue differently, right? You may argue differently because you might argue the school of thought. I mean, I would say they will, right, impact for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health. They will impact, right, our romantic relationships, our marriages, etc., right? But you may argue neuroplasticity, and when like the brain, and we're adaptable and we are capable of reprogramming our brains. or like the ancient philosophers make a distinction between the brain and the mind, right? The mind doesn't take up time and space, right? But we can change our attitudes, we can develop, right? Um, the human being is habitual, right? And what becomes habit can become our destiny. But then those that argue, no, we could change our destination, right? It's a choice. It might be difficult, right? Sometimes when you encourage people or you invite people to take on a new, this isn't working for you. You've identified it, and in discussion in a therapy session, for example, they've identified this is the goal that I want to go for. This new direction will be much more beneficial for me, but there's a resistance, but it's too hard. And you kind of left answering the rhetorical question, at least in the mind of what do you mean too hard? Is it 40% too hard or 50% too hard? Like who measures what is too hard? Sometimes change comes with struggle, and there's a need for self-determination. There's a need for that capacity to be driven where I will get knocked down or I will attempt to learn this new skill and I'm going to mess up. But there's a voice inside that says, believing in the process and being consistent and that over time, the improvement will make place. So yeah, it's just a little bit of a food for thought with respect to, what I'm saying, like our sex drives, our desire for love and our need for love and our need for attachment, our need for intimacy. And although there are those that are triggered and feel vulnerable and are unable or find it extremely difficult to be intimate, it doesn't mean that it's not an inherent need. It's not a primordial need that's in the human being. It's more like something has happened in that person's process that's disrupted that, and it is possible to overcome. But that's got to be for another podcast for another time. But I appreciate you staying with me for the duration of the High Caliber Man podcast, and I would be humbled. Yeah, but I'd be appreciative if you were able to leave a comment in the comment section about that initial question. Can we have relationships outside of our social situations? Or reflect on, if you care to share, by all means, but if not, just reflect on um, how do our individual life experiences, right, impact our relationships, marriages. So yeah, remember to like, share, and subscribe, leave a comment. And until next time, peace. Boom.